that they still sort of makes me makes me jump a little bit. Okay, so we've got about half an hour, 45 minutes. If you have to hop off before we finish, no problem. Um, and in that time, I'm going to take the first 20 minutes or so to share a little bit more with you about the course, what we cover, how the course works. And then the rest of time is open to any questions you may have. And we can do them live, or you can just put them in the chat box, whichever works for you. Just a little bit, a very brief bit about me. For either of you who don't know my personal background, I've spent most of my career in brand strategy and communications, corporate social responsibility, and lastly, sustainability narratives, working with global brands like Patagonia, like Timberland, like Cargill, like Levi's, and also with a lot of tech scale-ups in renewable energy, food systems and construction, and also a lot of time working with NGOs on systems change campaigns. So you might find it curious that the focus of my work is very much now on place. And there are some, pretty simple reasons for that. You may have heard either myself or Otto Scharmer or other people talk about the story of separation that has played out over the last 3-4 centuries, maybe, whilst we have been existing in a mechanistic mindset where we have separated ourselves from nature, that's resulted in the ecological harm that we see going on apace all around us, the separation of humans to humans that manifests as everyday sexism, racism, nationalism, inequality, colonialism, polarization, around beliefs around competition as foundational to organizational and societal design. And the separation of our inner and outer lives and the masculine and feminine psychological qualities, where we favored those that are more masculine, like competition, over collaboration and compassion. So for me, all of those stories, despite the fact that I've worked a lot of my life with global brands, are much easier to begin to address in place. And probably the second important point, after years of working on systems change from a global perspective and observing and studying complexity, one of the things that was really apparent to me is that the levels of complexity in global systems make it infinitely harder and slower to make the kind of change that was urgently needed. It's not that they can't be done, but they're slower and they're more moribund, and they have yet more additional layers of complexity. So I feel there is a lot of power in coming at systems change from a bottom-up and local perspective. And the third thing, I guess, is about people and complexity. And just as systems are complex, so are we as people. And as we've advanced as a species, we've developed, we have more layers, more nuance, more complexity ourselves. So if you think of a group of any people in the room, you will have different levels of paradigm in a room. You'll have different cultural experiences. You'll have different life history. You'll have different personalities and characters. And even in my short lifetime, that has added layers of complexity that make interpersonal relationships extremely difficult. So again, I find that is a really powerful way to manage that complexity is from place. So for me, I guess I'd say the place is the most powerful interface between natural systems and human systems. It's the most powerful interface for the story of separation between humans to be healed, and it's the most powerful interface for personal and systemic development to happen. And that's really what I've tried to design into Power of Place as a learning journey. So on to what's in the journey. Let me have a go at sharing my screen with you. Okay, view. I'm hoping it will be full screen. Is that full screen for you? Yep, okay, great. Okay, so The course is designed with 3 basic premises that are followed by 3 inquiries. And the first premise is that humans have a powerful role to play on the planet as catalysts of systemic evolution. So the question that threads all the way throughout the learning journey is how do we discover what role we have, and therefore what role our projects and our organizations and our places can actually play. The second premise is that to change the way we design, we have to change the way we think. And it certainly wasn't me, that wiser minds than me have said that. Everybody from, I think, even from Aristotle, Bucky Fuller, it's a commonly, hopefully accepted thing. So how do we consistently challenge our own thinking and that of others to ensure we are acting and being as regenerative as possible? And that regenerative places are designed using living systems as a basis for design, culture, and being. So the question is, how do we design systems and culture regeneratively? And how do we as leaders embody what it is to be regenerative ourselves? The journey very simply works. It's 14 weeks, but 12 weeks of live sessions, which are 2 hours over 12 weeks. And at the end, there is a 2-day gathering, which you don't have to attend, but generally people do. But sometimes it's difficult to take a day off in a week. But the gathering is where we all share our insights, what we've learned, the experiments that we have carried out, collectively, and we hold a series of fish bowls where we collectively work on each other's projects to see what the next level of action is going to be. So in advance of each live session, there are pre-reading materials to study. Some may be videos, some may be written texts, some may be short sections from books that people have gifted to the course. And during the course, we'll work in small cohorts. So a number of people that have already signed up to the course have signed up as teams. So we have teams of 3 and 4 from several councils, several private estates, several city groups that are coming to work on the course. But we've also got individuals who are really keen to learn, from coaches through to consultants and sustainability practitioners who are keen. And those people who come as individuals, we put together in small cohorts to work throughout the course. But you do also come together in the plenary groups, in the live sessions. So there's plenty of chance to meet and work with, in breakout groups, everybody who is on the course. Slightly differently on this learning journey from last year's Regenerators journey, there is an active opportunity to work on an existing project, so an assignment in a way. It's not a master's thesis, but I really strongly believe in learning through doing. So each week there are exercises and activities that reflect the content of that week that you can go and do and apply to a particular project that's either an existing project you're working on, or by revisiting a past project as a reflective exercise, as a what would we have done differently if we had used this approach. Each week there is some reflective disruption to disrupt our own thinking. And each week there are opportunities to share our reflections and work both in pairs, in small groups, and together with your cohort, which will usually be about 6 people. So this probably looks deeply complicated to you, but it gives you an idea as a schematic for the course, the threads that work throughout the course, so living systems design. Some of these principles are reflected from Carol Sanford's 7 principles. Some of them are reflected from Janine Benyus's biomimicry principles, and I've woven them together in my own particular way. The course, so all of those principles weave throughout the whole course, so that we're learning constantly as we go about how to apply living systems design. The course is then split into 3 sections. The first is really systemic and theoretic and knowledge, but there are still active components and practice assignments that you can take out and do. The middle section is very focused on people, and that is very much about finding regenerative ways to deal with polarity, to deal with conflict, to deal with the tensions that exist that make community engagement or stakeholder engagement so much more difficult over the last 10 years than it has ever been. It's also an opportunity for us to learn as individuals and to reflect on our own practice, because if we can't embody principles and qualities of regenerative leaders ourselves, we're far less likely to be able to take that out into the projects that we work on. And the final section is then very much about place, strategy, and story, is putting the learning that we have gleaned from the first two parts of the course together in active ways and strategies and implementation ideas. Right throughout the course, we'll be offering different frameworks as support tools for transformation along the way that you can practice learning that support you. Anything, there will be some frameworks that have come from a fantastic guy called J.G. Bennett. There will be some frameworks like the 3 Horizons model from Bill Sharp that you may have come across before, that will look at different ways of applying as we go through. So that's generally the way in which the 12 weeks plays out, with a main theme, a reflection on a key living systems principle, and then some practices, qualities, and tools that sit underneath it in the bottom row, as you see there. So, for example, in the 3rd week, when we're looking at to understand pattern literacy, we're looking to develop, we will be looking at how we identify patterns of place over a long period of time, energetic patterns, economic patterns, ecological patterns, energetic patterns that inform us of what the next stage of evolution for that place, and therefore the strategy and story we should employ, might be. And we're focusing at that point in time on the principle in living systems, which is biocultural uniqueness. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea about the design structure of the course. And one of the things that is important there is, if we look at the living systems design principle of wholeness, is even in the design of this course, I'm looking all of the time to reflect on and ensure it's a whole experience. Though anything that we deliver, a course is fragmented by being divided up into subjects and weeks, to ensure that everything builds from a pedagogic perspective, but more importantly, an experience perspective towards a whole. So the actual experience of the course should reflect what the principle of wholeness actually means for you. So let me just talk about that a little bit more. So if we take a place like Amsterdam, for example, in terms of being wholeness, there is something about Amsterdam, and this may not be your experience, that it is unique to the quality of the place and the energy of the place. It has in its beingness, in its isness, a certain quality as a whole that is what makes it Amsterdam. Wholeness is quite a slippery subject to get our hands around, so we come back to it constantly during the course. But Amsterdam is comprised of parts. The parts are canals, they're people, they're cycle lanes. But as a whole, does it have cohesion? And how do you take a place that has existed for hundreds of years, if it's not whole, and make it whole? And create more of a whole experience. And we'll apply that to smaller places and also larger places during the course. So if, for example, we talk about biocultural uniqueness, this is one of the islands that comprises the Azores that I have been doing some work with. And what we're looking for is what is unique to this place? What is unique about its ecology? What is unique about its atmosphere, the experience of being there? What is unique about its culture, and how has that changed over time to help us shape what its story and what its concept might be? And one of the things that we have been looking at from that point of view to design a concept to work with, that we have discovered through study, is that as a group of islands, historically, it was a place of rest, a place of provisioning. It being in the middle of the Atlantic, it was a place where people landed to restock their ships in the Middle Ages. It is also a place of revitalization. It is a place where whales stop on their way traveling north in the Atlantic each season to recuperate and rest before they move on to strike out further north. And that has given us something to really deeply think about how we redesign an approach to tourism and narrative. When we started to really understand these were the patterns and the uniqueness that characterized something about the islands of the Azores. But what about, for example, what about when we're thinking in the first and second week about role if you're a private estate? So one of the projects, for example, that I have been working on is with a private estate in the south of England. And one of the things that we've been noticing about its historical patterns are that it has always had a role in dialogue and conflict resolution. There is a huge ancient old house in the middle of the estate that is home to a lot of secret dialogues of MI5 style that go on there, where if there are conversations to be had between President Putin and an American president, they might happen there and you would never know about it. But it also has a story in the Middle Ages of being a place of where local citizens came for help with difficult births. So what does that mean to the role that this estate might play in the system that surrounds it? And we're inching ever closer towards looking at a question which says, well, what is maybe our role is to host dialogue about the role of a private estate in the 21st century. We haven't got there yet, but we're inching closer. So that's sometimes I feel it's richer to hear examples of how what is in the course arrives at a solution than it is to hear about detail of the course. Here's another story, which is in Jersey, and islands are marvelous places for systemic experimentation because they're beautifully boundaried. But this is a project, a systemic project, but designed with a different approach by a young, incredibly bright girl who, with her friends on Jersey, was very keen on buying high nutrition organic food and found that they couldn't because the food system on Jersey is really irretrievably linked to the supermarket system. And the only surviving organic farmers on Jersey had simply been totally marginalized by the island system, which is, of course, rooted very deeply in mechanistic mindset being a tax haven, for example. So I think you can only imagine the kind of mindset that we get there. But she was very keen to design a project that made it possible to change the island's approach to food, and used a combination of regenerative thinking and design, which I was very proud to help with, but also system and service design to create a food store for the organic farmers on the island through which they could sell their produce, but that wouldn't have been enough because you wouldn't be able to sell enough, but also then designed a series of services to be part of that offer. So they had designed a kitchen where they created experimental meals out of the produce that could be grown in Jersey, where they brought cooks together, quite famous chefs, and foraged across the island to count the hundreds of species that grow naturally on Jersey and to create recipes, and then to take those out to schools so that they could start to systemically change the food experience and the taste bud opportunity of people in Jersey. And I can't say it's been easy. It's been quite a long haul, but she has had some marvelous recognition for the work that she's done, and has now been appointed by the government of Jersey to look at the whole nutritional food system in the school system there. So I think that's a marvelous achievement. So the middle of the course really, it focuses very much on what it is to be human in these times, and contains both qualities and practices for us as systemic change makers, but also a moment to reflect on how we continually develop ourselves. So we'll be looking at things like, how do we design projects that connect everybody in a place to that project? How do we have community engagement that is not, if you're a developer, for example, about designing everything that you want to have on a piece of land that maximizes the potential for profit, get architects to design it, and then when everything is decided, go out to consult with villages that are going to be affected. What is a more regenerative way to do that? So we'll be looking at processes like constellations, we'll be looking at processes like charrettes. How can we do these more regeneratively? Certainly where I am, something that is going to become increasingly a tension, and I don't think it's just in the UK, is the tension between housing development, nature protection, land ownership and use, food production. And instead of coming together to talk about what is the way forward, we are constantly activistly going at each other without being able to shift positions. We don't go forward in that way. So there's a chunk of work in the middle of the course that really looks at how both we as leaders and throughout practice in our work can bring a more regenerative approach to bringing people together, what those practices are for uncertain and turbulent times. And then when we get to the far end of the course, there's a lot of practical stuff. So we look at systemic acupuncture, inspired very much by people like Jaime Lerner, which might be considered tactical, but can also be systemic change if we know how to identify where to act. We're used to thinking about water and Venice as part of what it takes to create a place. We're used to thinking about trees are an additional, but what about combining the two? What about places which have access to neither? How do you begin an infrastructure project of this size? What about music? Music is also good at acupuncture. Every single place has its own song, but often we can't hear it over the noise of everyday life. So how do we identify what the song of our place is? And in Aboriginal thinking, for example, they're very strongly connected to the song of the land, of the place in which they live. That's absolutely true in Paris, in London, or in Rome, but we can't hear it anymore. So how do we bring that song and that vibration back to life? And what is the relationship to art and place? How do we create systemic interventions that might be historic in nature, they might be futuristic in nature, but that capture a moment for reflection and regenerative development in the people of their place. And this is an example which you may have seen, you may have visited, but it still stays in my imagination because it was so evocative. It became a talking point. But how do we look at, how do we design events such as these that are catalysts for rethinking our relationships to land and place, over and above just being something for pure enjoyment? How do we bring that regenerative development piece to the work that we do? This may not be something that any of you recognize, but I think there is also a role for us to, as I talked about in the beginning, we talked about healing the story of separation, and this is a marvelous example of doing that in place. The road that you see on your left is in Belfast, and it delineates the Catholic and Protestant communities. And for many years during the Troubles was a constant battleground. It was an incredibly difficult and unsafe place to go. But the road had very many architectural marvels and really strong places, like the prison that you can see on the bottom right hand side, that ran into disuse, that were contributing to the constant sense of it being a broken down battleground between people. And a project that took probably 10 years, from just before the Good Friday Agreement to about 6-7 years after it, was a group of people who sought to bring those two incredibly divided communities together and hold a conversation about what the future of this road could look like. So these are the kind of case studies we'll look at and study. How did they even start to design, before even bringing the two communities together? What are the things that they had to think about? How do we tread and design a pathway that is so incredibly careful when we have such warring and fractured and polarized communities, to create something that is regenerative? The prison in the end became a cultural centre for exhibitions and local gatherings. They never quite got to the point of talking about housing, because housing was the strongest bone of contention between the communities, because it was seen as territorial. But a lot of the work that we do in the first half of the course, identifying patterns, identifying energy flows, understanding the history of place, is what informs us when it comes to the design end of the course, so that we know how far and how fast or how slow do we need to go in creating a regenerative place-based project. We'll also have some special guests as well as me, because me all the way through would be utterly dull and boring. For example, today, Dr. Dominique Hess, who's based in Australia, has agreed to be one of our special guests. She has an enormously long history in place-based development and design, is working with an interesting organisation that's just launched called Future of Cities outside of Miami, along with some colleagues of mine from Regenesis. But we pick our special guests depending on how the cohort forms. So if, for example, we have a large number of people from the tourism industry in the cohort, Anna will come along. If we have people who are particularly interested in bioregional design, Daniel will come along. So we shape the final array of special guests once the cohort closes on August the 20th. So what will you learn? I hope a lot. But here are probably most of the key points. So how to identify that evolutionary and transformative role that both you and your projects or organisations can play in the system in which you live. How do you co-creatively shape a future story and a concept that underpins what you're going to work on together with your stakeholders? How do you design a culture and environment in which difference is celebrated instead of division created? That comes in the middle part of the course. How you use framework thinking every now and then to support your work. How to identify the paradigm of thought that you and other people are working from and constantly disrupt your thinking and theirs, and how you integrate regenerative design culture and being into your work. So those are the broad brushstrokes I hope that we'll cover in the 12 weeks. It is an introductory approach. I wouldn't like to call it a smorgasbord because that would be my Swedish heritage speaking. But clearly there's a lot in here that you could spend, as I have done the last 10 years studying. So we want to give a start, but we want to also make it practical so that there are things that you can go out and do straight away. How do you get involved? You can register on the website. You can download the prospectus there. We do have some bursary places. They're a little bit limited, and I really would like to mainly give them to new charities, CICs and startups, but they do exist. And also if you've been particularly financially challenged by COVID, and many of us have done, do feel free to apply. And here are the different costs. We have 2 different costs at each level as we operate what we describe as the gift economy. So all of the money from the course goes to our impact work. And if you can afford to pay the summit price, that means we can put a little bit more of the budget into our impact work. But again, please feel free to either apply for the bursary or, it is about give what you can and take what you need for us. If you'd like to have a one-to-one chat with me at any point in time, I think we can probably do that now as we're a small group, but you can always email me here, jenny@reallyregenerative.org, and I'm happy to chat a little bit further. Okay, so that is enough from me because it was quite a lot, I think. So I am curious to hear any questions which you may have for me. Anna, hello. Patricia, hello. You joined us when we had begun. Sorry, I let you in, but I felt I should keep going for those of us that are here. But any questions that you have for me, please feel free to put them in the chat box, but be brave enough to unmute yourself and come on, and I'll stop recording now so that